The rust on the mailbox post had eaten the family name down to a ghostly whisper. Sharma. It was a name that felt like it belonged to someone else now. A ghost haunting the peeling paint of a farmhouse that was slowly surrendering to the Pennsylvania damp. Sergeant Anya Sharma, United States Marine Corps, retired, was a ghost of a different sort. She haunted the quiet, dusty rooms of her own life, a life that had effectively ended 3 years ago in the dust and fire of Helmand Province. Each morning was a ritual of survival. The cold floorboards bit at the soles of her feet. The coffee was black and tasted like ash. Outside, the November wind howled a mournful dirge through the skeletal branches of the oak trees. She moved through the house with a practiced economy of motion, her body a roadmap of healed-over violence. A web of silvery scars climbed her left forearm from a piece of shrapnel that had nearly taken the limb. A deeper, angrier line of tissue disappeared under the collar of her shirt, a permanent necklace from the blast that had thrown her like a rag doll. The physical scars were easy. They were honest. They didn't lie or whisper in the dark. It was the other ones, the invisible ones, that were killing her by inches. They lived behind her eyes, replaying the moment the world had turned to white noise and screaming metal. The pressure wave that felt like the hand of God slapping her into the earth. The smell of cordite and burning diesel. The silence that came after. A profound, deafening void where the voices of her squad used to be. Corporal Davies, with his stupid jokes. Lance Corporal Miller, who was planning his wedding. They were gone, just gone, vaporized into memory. And him, Kaiser, her partner, her other half. The German shepherd with eyes the color of old whiskey and a heart bigger than the whole damned country. He had been ahead of her, his nose to the ground, a living, breathing extension of her own senses. He'd stopped, given her the subtle alert she'd been trained to recognize. She'd raised her hand to halt the squad, opened her mouth to call it in. But the world had exploded before the sound could form. In the chaotic aftermath, a whirlwind of dust and shouting, and the rhythmic thwump-thwump of inbound medevac choppers, she'd seen him. He was being carried on a stretcher by 2 medics, a bloody field dressing wrapped around his flank. He was alive. His amber eyes had found hers across the swirling chaos, a look of confusion and pain that mirrored her own. She had tried to get to him, to crawl if she had to, but her own handlers were strapping her down, pumping her full of morphine. They put her on one bird and him on another. "He's a hero, Sergeant," someone had shouted over the rotor wash. "We'll take care of him." That was the last time she had seen him, the last time she had felt whole. The military, in its infinite and often cruel wisdom, had decided her wounds were too severe to continue service. They gave her a Purple Heart, a medical discharge, and a handshake. They promised to keep her updated on Kaiser's recovery and eventual retirement. The updates came, at first. He was recovering well. He was being reassigned to a new handler. Then the updates became less frequent. He was stateside. He was in a specialized training program. Then silence. For 2 years, nothing. She had become a ghost, and he had become a memory she tried to bury with all the others. The farmhouse was her purgatory. It had been her grandparents', left to her when her own parents passed. It was isolated, quiet, a place where she could let the silence swallow her whole. Most days, she did nothing. She sat on the porch and watched the world turn, the ghosts of her fire team sitting in the empty chairs beside her. They were always there, a jury of the dead. Survivor's guilt was a cold, heavy blanket she couldn't shrug off. She had lived. They had not. She had left her partner behind. It was a sin without forgiveness. The phone seldom rang. When it did, it was usually a wrong number or a soulless telemarketer. She almost didn't answer it. The shrill, unfamiliar ringing was an intrusion, a violation of the tomb she had so carefully constructed. But something made her pick it up, a flicker of the old instinct. "Is this Anya Sharma?" The voice on the other end was male, clipped, and professional. It carried the unmistakable cadence of a career officer. "Who's asking?" Her own voice was a rusty hinge, rough from disuse. "Colonel Matthews. We served together briefly at Leatherneck. I was Major Matthews then. I'm stateside now at the Pentagon." The name registered dimly, a face in a sea of faces, a command tent, a briefing. "Sir." The old habit died hard. "Sergeant, I'm not calling officially. This is off the record. It's about your MWD, Kaiser." Anya's heart, a dead heavy thing in her chest, gave a single painful thud. Her knuckles whitened on the receiver. "What about him?" There was a pause, a sigh of static. "It's not good news. He washed out of the program a year ago. A series of handlers. He became difficult, aggressive. He was sold as surplus to a private security firm. From there, the trail gets murky. We lost track, until yesterday." Anya's breath caught in her throat. She leaned against the wall, the faded floral wallpaper cold against her shoulder. "He was picked up as a stray in Raleigh County, North Carolina," the colonel continued, his voice flat, delivering the facts like a casualty report. "He's in bad shape, malnourished, signs of abuse. He bit an attendant at the county shelter. They've designated him a dangerous animal. He's scheduled to be euthanized in 48 hours. The words hit her harder than the IED. Euthanized, a sterile, bureaucratic word for killing. The hero they had promised to take care of was going to die alone, scared and angry, in a concrete box, labeled a monster. The injustice of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She saw it all with sickening clarity. Kaiser, confused and betrayed, lashing out from a place of pain, in a world that saw only a vicious dog, not a wounded warrior. He was a mirror. His fate was her own, just accelerated. Left behind, broken, and deemed too dangerous to be near. They were both just waiting to die. Where? The word was a shard of glass in her throat. Anya. Sergeant, it's a long way, and the legalities. Where is he, Colonel? She repeated. Her voice no longer a whisper, but the low, commanding tone she hadn't used in 3 years. It was the voice that had moved men through firefights, a voice that did not brook argument. Matthews gave her the address. Godspeed, Sergeant, he said, and the line went dead. The numbness that had been her shield for 3 years shattered. In its place, a cold, clear purpose ignited. The ghosts at her side for once fell silent, replaced by a single driving mission. They weren't going to kill her dog. Not while she was still breathing. Action was a balm. It was the only prayer she knew. The derelict farmhouse became a forward operating base. She checked her meager savings. A few $100s. Not enough. She looked around the dusty living room, at the furniture that had belonged to 3 generations of her family. Sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. She found the silver tea set her grandmother had cherished, wrapped it in a blanket, and drove it to the nearest pawn shop. The man behind the counter gave her a fraction of its worth, but it was enough. Cash for gas. Cash for the fight ahead. Her truck, a relic from a better time, groaned in protest but started. The engine coughed and sputtered like a dying man, but it held. The drive south was a blur of asphalt and regret. She didn't stop to eat or sleep, just for gas, her body running on a fuel made of coffee, rage, and a desperate rekindled hope. Every mile that clicked by on the odometer was a second ticking off Kaiser's life. She pulled into the Raleigh County Animal Shelter with less than an hour to spare before they closed for the day. It was a low, cinder-block building that smelled of bleach and despair. The sound of frantic, lonely barking was a constant, heartbreaking chorus. This was a graveyard for the forgotten. The woman at the front desk was a fortress of bureaucratic indifference. Her name tag read Brenda. She had tired eyes and a permanent frown etched into her face. "Can I help you?" she asked, not looking up from her computer screen. "I'm here for a German Shepherd," Anya said, her voice steady. "He was brought in a few days ago, military working dog." Brenda finally looked up, her expression hardening. "The biter, Unit 7. He's on the euthanasia list for tomorrow morning. Non-releasable, county ordinance." She said it with the finality of a judge passing sentence. "I'm his handler," Anya stated, her gaze unwavering. It was a lie, technically. She wasn't his handler anymore. But in her soul, it was the truest thing she had ever said. "Doesn't matter," Brenda sighed, turning back to her screen. "He's legally property of the county now. Once an animal is designated vicious, policy is policy. There's nothing I can do." Anya placed her hands flat on the counter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You are going to take me back to his kennel. I'm going to see my dog." "That is not a request." The woman flinched. For the first time, she truly saw the person standing in front of her. She saw the scars, the coiled tension in her shoulders, the absolute, unshakable certainty in her dark eyes. It was the look of someone who had walked through hell and was not afraid to go back. Brenda swallowed hard. Something in her professional armor cracked. "Look," she said, her voice softer now. "Even if I wanted to, which I don't, he's dangerous. He put Tim, one of our best attendants, in the hospital. Stitches, the dog is broken." "So am I," Anya said quietly. "Let me see him." Brenda hesitated for a long moment, then nodded, grabbing a ring of keys. "Fine. But I'm calling animal control if you try anything stupid. And you're not going in the kennel with him." She led Anya down a long, echoing concrete hallway lined with cages. The barking intensified, a symphony of desperation. At the very end, in an isolated quarantine kennel, was Unit 7. He was huddled in the far corner, a dark shape against the gray concrete. He was thinner than she could have imagined, his ribs starkly visible beneath his dull coat. A fresh, crude scar ran along his snout. He didn't look up. He just lay there, a statue of misery, trembling. "Kaiser," Anya whispered, her voice catching. The dog didn't move. His spirit was gone. "He doesn't answer to that name," Brenda said from a safe distance. "We don't know what they called him." Anya ignored her. She knelt down, her face close to the chain-link fence. The smell of fear and sickness was thick in the air. She thought back to the dust of Afghanistan, to the routines and rituals that had bound them together. There was a phrase, a sequence of commands in Pashto she had used, a quiet praise for a job well done. It was their secret language. "Korsha Zizmarge," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Good work, my lion." The dog's head lifted. His ears, which had been flat against his skull, swiveled forward. He turned his head slowly, and his amber eyes, clouded with pain and confusion, met hers. For a second, there was nothing. Just a broken animal staring at a stranger. Then a flicker, a spark deep within those haunted eyes. His tail gave a single, tentative thump against the concrete floor. He pushed himself up on shaky legs, took a hesitant step forward, and whined. It was a sound of such profound, heartbreaking recognition that it tore through Anya's chest. He knew her. Underneath all the pain and betrayal, he still knew her. I'm getting him out of here, Anya said to Brenda, her eyes never leaving Kaiser. Whatever it takes. The battle that followed was not one of bullets, but of paperwork and policy. Brenda, moved by what she had witnessed, found a loophole, a 24-hour stay of execution for positive identification by a potential owner. It bought them time, but not freedom. The vicious designation was a wall. To break through it, they needed a veterinarian to assess him and sign off, a long shot for a dog that had already sent one man to the hospital. Brenda made a call. There's a vet, Dr. Evans. She works with a lot of rescue groups. She's tough, but she's fair. Maybe she'll come look at him. It's the only chance he's got, Doctor. Eris Evans arrived an hour later. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of no-nonsense competence. She listened to Anya's story with a skeptical expression, her arms crossed over her chest. A former MWD is a highly trained animal, Miss Sharma. They don't just bite people for no reason. I need to see him. They went back to the kennel. Kaiser was now at the front of the cage, his nose pressed against the wire, his eyes fixed on Anya. Dr. Evans watched him, her clinical gaze missing nothing. She saw the tremor in his legs, the way he flinched at loud noises, the raw patches of skin where his fur was missing. He's been through hell, the vet murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Let's scan him for a chip. Getting the scanner near him was tense. Kaiser growled low in his chest, the fear and aggression rising again. Anya knelt down, speaking to him in a low, soothing stream of Pashto, her hand held flat against the fence. Easy, Lion. Easy. You're safe. Miraculously, he quieted, allowing Dr. Evans to get a reading. The scanner beeped. Evans stared at the number on the small screen, her brow furrowed. That's not right. She pulled out her phone, typed in the number, and waited. Her eyes widened. Good God, what is it? Anya asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. This isn't a standard military microchip, Doctor. Evans said, her voice hushed. It's flagged. Department of Defense, Research and Development. There's a DARPA project prefix. This dog, he's not just surplus, he's classified. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. Kaiser wasn't just a dog who had fallen through the cracks. He was an asset, a valuable, high-tech piece of government property that had somehow ended up in a county kill shelter. His washing out wasn't a failure, it was a cover story. He had been lost, or worse, stolen. And the people he had escaped from were not just backyard abusers. They were people who dealt in secrets and military hardware. We need to get him out of here, Dr. Evans said, her tone suddenly urgent. Not just out of the shelter, but out of this town now. Working with a frantic energy, Dr. Evans pulled every string she had. She called in favors, citing a possible rabies quarantine and the need for specialized observation at her private clinic. The paperwork was a flimsy pretext, but Brenda, now a firm conspirator, pushed it through. Anya signed a dozen liability waivers, effectively taking temporary custody of a dog that was technically a piece of classified federal property. Getting him into her truck was another challenge. He balked at the kennel, associating it with his prison. Anya had to sit on the open tailgate, not looking at him, just talking, until he finally crept forward and lay down in the truck bed beside her. The moment the clinic door closed behind them, a palpable sense of relief washed over Anya. They were safe. For now, Dr. Evans' clinic was a small, clean sanctuary on the outskirts of town. She sedated Kaiser gently, treating his wounds, drawing blood, and giving him fluids. Under the bright clinical lights, the full extent of his abuse was sickeningly clear. Old scars crisscrossed his body, some from combat, others clearly from a whip or a chain. He was dangerously underweight. Whoever had him was trying to break him, Dr. Evans said, her voice tight with anger. Or control him. They starved him to force compliance. She found something else. Under his fur, high on his shoulder, was a small, almost invisible tattoo, a series of letters and numbers. She took a photo and sent it to a contact she had in the military veterinary corps. Anya stayed by Kaiser's side as the sedative wore off. She sat on the cold linoleum floor, her hand resting lightly on his flank, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing. He whimpered in his sleep, his legs twitching, no doubt running from ghosts of his own. She knew the feeling. The reply to Dr. Evans' text came late that night. It was a single cryptic message. Asset is designated Chimera. Handler Kaya 6 months ago. Incident classified. Asset presumed lost. Extreme caution advised. Powerful people are looking for him. The name hit Anya like a physical blow. Chimera. A monster from myth made of disparate parts. It confirmed her fear. Kaiser was part of some advanced program, genetically or cybernetically enhanced. He wasn't just a dog, he was a weapon system. And his last handler was dead. We're in trouble, Anya said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. Dr. Evans nodded grimly. That security firm he was sold to, it was probably a shell company. A front for black market arms dealers. They weren't buying a guard dog. They were buying a prototype. The war hadn't ended for Kaiser. It had just changed form. And by rescuing him, Anya had just stepped back onto the battlefield. She looked out the clinic window into the dark, quiet street. The illusion of safety evaporated. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every passing car felt like surveillance. Her old hypervigilance, the curse of her PTSD, came roaring back, but this time it felt different. It felt necessary. It felt like coming home. She spent the night in a chair beside Kaiser's kennel, a borrowed shotgun from Dr. Evans' office resting across her lap. She didn't sleep. She watched. She listened. The skills that had kept her alive in Afghanistan reawakened from their long dormancy. She was a Marine again, a protector, a sentinel standing guard over her charge. The attack came just before dawn, in the gray, liminal hour when the world is at its most vulnerable. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was quiet, professional, a soft click of the lock on the back door, the whisper of rubber-soled boots on linoleum. Anya was moving before the first shadow fell across the hallway. She didn't think, she reacted. 3 years of civilian life sloughed away in an instant, leaving the raw, honed instincts of a warrior. She melted into the deeper darkness of the examination room, the shotgun held at a low ready, its cold steel a familiar comfort in her hands. There were 2 of them. They moved with the fluid, silent economy of trained operators, dressed in black, faces obscured by balaclavas. They carried suppressed pistols. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to retrieve their property and eliminate any witnesses. One of them swept the main room while the other headed for the kennels. He held a small electronic device, likely a tracker keyed to Kaiser's chip. He stopped outside Kaiser's run, a tranquilizer gun now in his hand. In his drugged state, Kaiser was helpless. The rage that filled Anya was pure and cold. These men had hurt her dog. They had turned a noble warrior into a broken, terrified creature. And now they had come to finish the job. She wouldn't let them. She stepped out from the shadows. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice low and calm. The man spun around, his pistol coming up. He was fast, but she was faster. The shotgun bucked in her hands, the blast deafening in the enclosed space. The spread of buckshot caught him high in the chest, slamming him back against the steel kennel door with a sickening crunch. He slid to the floor, motionless. The second man was already reacting, firing 2 suppressed rounds in her direction. The distinctive pht of the weapon was followed by the sharp crack of glass as the medicine cabinet behind her exploded. Anya dropped to the floor, rolling behind a stainless steel examination table, the shotgun now empty. She was outgunned, her only weapon a single shot. The man was advanced, using the rows of kennels as cover. He was methodical, a predator closing in. Anya's mind raced, cataloging the room, searching for a weapon, an advantage. A heavy-duty steel IV stand, a tray of surgical instruments, a canister of liquid nitrogen. But she wasn't alone. The shotgun blast had shocked Kaiser out of his sedative haze. Adrenaline surged through him, overriding the drugs. He was on his feet, the fur on his back raised, a low, terrifying growl rumbling in his chest. This wasn't the cowed, beaten animal from the shelter. This was MWD Kaiser. This was Chimera. The second mercenary, focused on Anya, made a fatal mistake. He exposed his flank to the kennel for a fraction of a second as he moved to get a clearer shot. It was all the opening Kaiser needed. With a roar of fury, he launched himself against the kennel door, the same door the first merc had been thrown against. The latch, damaged by the impact, gave way. The door flew open. 110 pounds of genetically engineered fury and righteous canine rage exploded from the kennel. He hit the mercenary at thigh level, his jaws locking onto the man's gun arm. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of shock and pain. His pistol clattered to the floor. He tried to fight back, to strike the dog with his free hand, but Kaiser was a whirlwind of muscle and teeth. He wasn't just biting, he was fighting, using his weight and momentum to drive the man off balance, his training taking over. Anya didn't hesitate. She surged from behind the table, grabbing the heaviest instrument she could find, a hefty steel bone clamp. She brought it down on the back of the mercenary's head, with all the force she could muster. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged sound of her own breathing and Kaiser's heavy panting. He released the man's arm and limped toward her, a dark stain spreading on the bandage on his side, where his stitches had torn. He nudged his head against her hand and looked up at her, his amber eyes clear and fierce. He had saved her. They had saved each other. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder. Dr. Evans, who had been hiding in her office and had called 911, emerged, her face pale. The scene was one of controlled carnage. 2 bodies, 1 dead, 1 unconscious, a battered Marine, and a wounded hero of a dog. When the local police arrived, they saw a bloodbath and a woman with a weapon. They put Anya in handcuffs, their questions sharp and accusatory. To them, she was a suspect in a homicide. The complexities of the situation were beyond their pay grade. Anya didn't resist. She knew how this looked. She was sinking, caught in a legal and jurisdictional nightmare she couldn't escape. She was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, watching them load Kaiser into an animal control van, when a fleet of black SUVs with government plates descended on the clinic. They moved with an efficiency that made the local police look like amateurs. Men in sharp suits and earpieces secured the scene. The back door of the lead vehicle opened, and Colonel Matthews stepped out. He looked older than she remembered, the weight of command etched on his face. He strode over to the cruiser, his eyes meeting hers through the window. He gave a sharp nod to the officer standing guard. "Uncuff her, she's with me." The officer sputtered a protest, but a flash of Matthews' credentials silenced him. The cuffs came off. Matthews opened her door. "Walk with me, Sergeant." They stood by the ambulance as the unconscious mercenary was loaded onto a gurney. "His name is Anton Volkov," Matthews said, his voice low. "Ex-Spetsnaz. He and his partner work for a private military contractor called Aegis Security, the same group that bought Kaiser at the surplus auction. They're not just contractors, Anya. They're brokers. They steal and sell sensitive U.S. military tech to the highest bidder. Rogue states, terrorist organizations, anyone with the cash." He paused, his gaze heavy. Kaiser wasn't just a dog they bought, he was the key to a much bigger prize. His last handler, Sergeant Davis, was working deep cover inside Aegis. He discovered they had a source inside DARPA. They were planning to sell the entire Chimera program. Not just one dog, but the genetic data, the training protocols, everything. Davis was getting close. Aegis found out and killed him. They staged it to look like a training accident. They took Kaiser, hoping to reverse engineer the tech inside him. The pieces clicked into place. The abuse, the starvation. They weren't just being cruel, they were running diagnostics, trying to figure out what made him special. Kaiser had escaped, and they had been desperately trying to get him back before he fell into the wrong hands. "But there's more," Matthews said, his voice dropping even lower. "The network that Aegis uses to move its assets. We've been tracking them for years. They have sources everywhere. They specialize in getting past our defenses. We now believe the IED that hit your team 3 years ago wasn't random bad luck." Anya stared at him, the world tilting on its axis. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you were targeted, Anya. Your team was betrayed. Someone on the inside gave Aegis your patrol route. It was a test run for them, to prove to a new client they could hit a Marine Special Operations unit with impunity. The death of your team, it was an advertisement. The guilt she had carried for 3 years, that heavy, suffocating blanket, suddenly transformed. It was no longer a weight, but a white-hot core of righteous fury. It wasn't her fault. She hadn't failed them. They had been murdered. And the same people who did it were the ones who had tortured her dog. Her survival, and Kaiser's, was no longer a curse. It was an anomaly they hadn't planned for, a loose end. Tears streamed down her face, hot and cleansing. They weren't tears of grief for herself, but for Davies and Miller and the others. Tears of rage for the honor of her fallen brothers. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a witness. She was a reckoning. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Now," Matthews said, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, "we finished the fight. Aegis doesn't know we have Volkov alive. He's going to tell us everything. And you and Kaiser, you've given us the break we've been waiting for." He looked over at the animal control van. "Don't worry. He's not going back to any shelter. He's being taken to a secure military veterinary hospital. He'll get the best care in the world." 6 months later, the Pennsylvania sun felt warm on Anya's face. The derelict farmhouse was showing signs of life. The peeling paint had been scraped away, replaced with a fresh coat of white. The porch swing, once broken, was repaired. In the yard, a small vegetable garden was thriving. She sat on the porch steps, a cup of coffee in her hand, watching the morning mist burn off the fields. The ghosts were gone. She still remembered her team, every day. But now she remembered them with love and honor, not with guilt. She was living for them, tending to this small patch of the country they had died to protect. A heavy head rested on her knee. She looked down into the clear, intelligent amber eyes of Kaiser. He was magnificent. His coat was thick and glossy, his body strong and muscled. The scars were still there, on his snout and on his flank, but like hers, they were just part of his story now. He had been officially and honorably discharged, his file permanently sealed. By a special directive from the Secretary of Defense, his sole custody guardianship had been transferred to her. Colonel Matthews had been true to his word. The information from the captured mercenary, combined with the data from Kaiser's chip and Anya's testimony, had allowed them to dismantle Aegis Security from the top down. The betrayal of her unit was avenged. A circle had been closed. Kaiser nudged her hand, whining softly. He wanted to play. Anya smiled, a real, easy smile that reached her eyes. She picked up the worn tennis ball from the step beside her and threw it far out into the field. Kaiser exploded into motion, a black and tan streak of pure joy, chasing the ball with an enthusiasm that belied his history as a classified weapon. He was not a weapon anymore, and she was not a ghost. They were just a woman and her dog, a pack of two. 2 broken soldiers who had found their way back from the brink, who had faced down the darkness together and found peace on the other side. He returned with the ball, dropping it at her feet, his tail wagging furiously. She picked it up, her fingers brushing his soft fur, and prepared to throw it again. The war was over. They were finally home.